What is art?
Art is
history.
What is art? That's a good question.
This is Art Uncovered.
Art is our collective cultural history.
A weekly podcast that brings you interviews with an eclectic mix of artists and creators.
Art is
disappointing your parents.
I'm your host, Kimberly. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week I am honored to be here with Sara J. Winston, a New York-based artist whose photographic self-portraiture practice works to capture her experience of living with multiple sclerosis. In this episode, we talk about her relationship with her camera, her notion of home, and her process of publishing books. Stay with us. Thanks again for tuning in to Art Uncovered, everyone. This week I am so excited to be here with Sara Winston. Sara, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So Sara, I'm so excited to talk about your work. And to start, I'm wondering if we could talk about a body of work that is wonderfully titled Our Body is a Clock. And are these a series of self-portraits?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so they're a series of self-portraits, and they're taken in the hospital environment, and in many of the images you're connected either to IV or other medical equipment. So yeah, I'm wondering if you could kind of take the mic now and tell us a bit about what you're exploring here.
Yes, definitely. In 2014, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and beginning with my first infusion, which I received in the spring of 2015, I started photographing myself mostly with my cell phone with one hand, just trying to digest the reality, my new reality of having a chronic illness, having very intense physical disability at that time, and not really having the language to talk about it. And I was using my cell phone camera to document and make pictures of being in the infusion suite and not sharing them with anyone. And then around 2019, when I became a parent, I had been off medication for several months, and I had been living in a fantasy that I wouldn't ever need to go back onto it. And
were you off the meds because you were pregnant?
Yes.
Okay.
And I've recently learned that in the 4 years since then, people who become pregnant stay on the medication. But I was off of the medication, and I had an exacerbation of disease symptoms and went back onto the meds at that time when my child was 3 months old. And I put my camera on a tripod. When I say I put my camera on a tripod, my formal big tool on the tripod, and I used a remote in part because I just had no idea what any of this looked like. It felt so crazy what it looked like from my vantage point, looking at my body, to then think, oh, I have all the tools at my house because the nurse came to my home to plug me into all of the medications, which wasn't usually the case. And I had all of these rules with the other work I was making outside of the hospital, where I was always making vertical pictures. But for the sake of this medical treatment with my 3-month-old kid, I just put the camera on the tripod horizontally because I couldn't deal with the possibility of it falling. And I made something like 400 pictures. And it gave me this sense of agency that I often don't feel because I don't work in the medical field. And usually I feel like not only a vulnerable patient, but that I just have to take things as they come. And I can't really, if my IV gets clogged or if it comes out, I just have to bear with the things that the caregiver might say or do, or the mistakes that may happen, that it's all just something that happens and I can't really have a part in it. And so that was the first time where making pictures while it was happening, not just with my camera looking down, but really looking at myself with the camera. And it occurred to me at that time that I had been embarrassed or nervous to bring the camera to the hospital. And there was something about having gone through childbirth where I was like, well, just don't have that apprehension anymore. And so I
Yeah, wow.
started bringing my tools.
What do you think about, like, what about being pregnant do you think gave you that confidence? Is
I
that
don't
the
know
right
if it
word
was
to use?
pregnancy.
Yeah.
I I think it was really childbirth.
Oh, oh.
Um, and just kind of putting all of this energy into the world and that like here is a human. I don't know. I don't know. But I just kind of felt much less timid after that. I
Wow,
think
wow.
in many regards
Hmm.
of existing, I went from being a very soft-spoken, nervous being to having more confidence and realizing that a lot of the things I've been worried about are just not worth not worth that energy.
Yeah. I want to ask a couple of follow-up questions here. So you said that you were diagnosed with MS, right?
Mhm.
Can you give us like a brief description of what this disease is for those listeners who might not have, experience with it?
Yes. So MS is a chronic disease of the central nervous system where the body communications between the brain and the body are disrupted. Protective cells around the brain cells and spinal cord cells are broken down, and so this can lead to various types of disability, cognitive disability, physical disability, um, intermittent episodes of disability. There are four types of MS, and one of them is a relapsing remitting form where people can go through periods of long remission of no symptoms. And then the other types are various forms of progressive disease where it's constantly getting worse. Um, I think often people think about if they know what MS is, they think about it as a monolith where if someone has MS, they have like a very linear timeline to physical disability and being in a wheelchair. Um, but it's very, I think it's important to note that there's such sophisticated medications on the market now that the narratives of MS look really different than they did even 10 years ago. The challenge is just accessing these medications because they're wildly expensive.
Do insurances cover them?
Hmm.
Thankfully, thankfully. Yeah, and I'm also so another follow-up question based on your first response there was you mentioned something about like a very big tool in reference to the camera. Was this in reference to the type of camera that you were bringing into the hospital?
Yes, I mean, to me, a big tool is anything bigger than my phone.
Ah,
Um,
okay, okay.
because I think I was trying to be so discreet that I didn't want to be seen doing anything in the hospital where I was going. There are no doors or walls, there's just curtains. And so you can see everything, you can hear everything. And the big tool that I took was my 35 millimeter digital camera and my tripod. So for those
Love
who
that.
don't know, it's about if you take your two fists and put them together, it's about that big.
Oh, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah, 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 yeah. And was there one of the questions that I had planned for you because I did like newborn photography in a hospital a number of years ago, and there was so
Mhm.
much concern over like HIPAA laws, which is like patient privacy laws. Did you run into any of those issues with, pulling out your camera? And was it in a private room that you were photographing in?
So it was a private room, but again, with these kind of shower curtain dividers.
Mm-hmm.
And no one ever gave me a hard time, and I think that's because I was photographing myself.
Ah,
And
okay.
for the most part, I was very conscientious about what of the nurses or other patients I might have been capturing.
Mm.
So I never ran into any issues with HIPAA.
Oh, that's great.
And while it was an imperfect outpatient experience, I went to the same hospital for 8.5 years. Because they never gave me a hard time about photographing, I never wanted to change or leave that
Wow.
place, because I've
Wow.
been to other procedures and other visits where there's signage that says absolutely no video or photography.
Mm. Mm.
And I just thought this was a nice little gift to
Yeah.
not worry about that.
Yeah. And then one last follow-up question about this project. So you said that you were photographing because you wanted to see what it was like to kind of view this scene, not from your own body, but from a third, kind of, yeah, I guess like third person perspective. What was it like looking at the photographs after after you took them?
Um, it's painful.
Yeah.
So I make these photographs on a digital tool, but I usually don't look at them for quite some time.
Mm.
I let them just kind of sit on the memory card for several months. So I'll accumulate several sessions, you could say, maybe 4 months of content, and then I'll look at them on a computer. And it's difficult because I don't think of the work as a documentary project, but I can't separate the reaction of seeing myself in that position.
Mm.
So it's been hard. I feel empowered when I'm doing the work and making the pictures, but then when I'm actually looking at it digitally, so small, it has felt really humbling.
Mm. And what about sharing them? Because, looking at them yourself is one thing, but then, making the decision to then share them with the world, what has that been like?
It has been fascinating. I mean, I had this incredible opportunity to put together an op-ed for the New York Times,
Wow, that's great.
and that was the first time that those pictures got a lot of attention.
Mm.
And
Are those on your website by any chance?
they are, but I will send you a PDF of the op-ed.
Okay.
Uh, it's writing, and it's only 5 pictures out of a deck of 50 that I had sent to them.
Okay.
But it was really amazing because I had all of these fears about my own vulnerability and exposure, but really what it did was help other people feel seen.
Mm.
Um, and I got a lot of emails from people who were just grateful. Yeah, it was a selection from what I have on here,
Okay.
but really a narrow selection. And the writing was about the constant concern about losing access to the medicine based on confusion about how the insurance system works.
Mm.
Um, I don't know. I feel, especially after that experience where I felt like there's such a void in this type of artwork in the world, especially pre-COVID. It's a little bit different now. When I was first sick, I was really looking for work that mirrored this experience and to understand how people synthesized or digested it or moved through it. And I couldn't find anything. I only found examples of artists or photographers, documentarians looking at people with terminal illness rather than someone looking at themselves through a chronic illness lens, which is really, I think it's really human. Um,
Can you you briefly describe there what the text part was about in regards to medicine? Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So in the text, I contrast my experience with the experience that one of my maternal aunts has had, where she didn't have health insurance ever. And she treated any discomfort she had with alcohol. And then by the time that she was diagnosed with MS, it was all too far gone, or so far progressed, I should say, that there was nothing they could really do. Um, and I think about or I talk about how fortunate I've been to work in jobs where I have, you know, I'm not paid incredibly, but I have access to good health insurance. And most people with an illness that requires chronic care or expensive medicines, they won't change jobs or they won't move in fear of disrupting this kind of house of cards of getting these medications paid for. The medication I was taking was retailing for $27,000 a month.
Jesus, oh my God.
And so what I write about is that, like, whether it's realistic or not, I have lived with this fear that I'll lose access to the medication. You know, as general elections come up, what will we be voting for in terms of healthcare reform? Excuse me. And I don't really understand the inhumanity of not making these medications available.
I would like to talk about another body of work. It might actually be two bodies of work, but I see a theme among them. The title of the projects are Goodbye High Street and Homesick. And I'll do a screen share for those of you who are watching on YouTube in a second. But I think it's interesting to talk about these projects in relation to the project we were just talking about, because Our Body is a Clock it seemed like your home was the hospital, or at least that was the environment in which these portraits were taken. And the other two projects, Goodbye High Street and Homesick, are about a home, right? So I'm curious if you could kind of talk about your interest in exploring the home. Yeah, why don't we start there?
Sure. So Homesick is the earliest project. I made those pictures in 2014 when I first started experiencing symptoms of multiple sclerosis. I had double vision and intermittent blindness. And I was making these pictures using the camera as an assistive device, where I would point out at the world and things that were doubled would become one single image in a way that my brain wasn't able to sort of manage. And up until this point, I hadn't ever used the automatic focus function of my camera, because I think in my training, it was more having the ultimate control with the manual focus was really the artistry. And so this series of pictures I made when I was moving from Detroit, where I was living, back to the Hudson Valley where I had grown up, because I really needed to be taken care of, because everything was just kind of falling apart. And then fast forward, I suppose, to Goodbye High Street in 2020, my partner and I tried to move to Berlin at the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020. And so we sublet our apartment and we had a visa appointment, and then the pandemic began. And we were waiting for the flattening of the curve and living with my parents in my childhood home. And while we were there, it was a total of perhaps oh gosh, March to August. So 5 months or so.
Yeah, about five. I had
Two
to count
weeks,
on my fingers.
2 weeks that became 5 months. I
Oh,
gave
wow.
myself this daily project of making these self-portraits in the way that I had done that first time in 2019 that I described earlier, where I put the camera on the tripod and then just saw what might happen when I stepped in front of the camera, but really doing this with my mom. And at the end of that period, when we moved out, my parents sold the house. And it really felt like I had found my photographic voice in this house, and we were saying goodbye to it. And um, I'm still figuring out where that fits into everything that I've done and I do. And I think I'll just say that generally I don't like talking about works in these project structures, even though that's an easy way to talk about them, because I think they're really all interconnected.
Looking at your website is so fascinating. You have to categorize again. You have a section of books. I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about your process of putting books together.
Mhm.
So if I click over here, what's one of them? So monographs. You have so many. Oh my gosh. Maybe one of the most recent ones from 2023. So are your books, are they self-published, or what's your process of publishing your work in the book format?
I've been really fortunate to work with publishers, independent publishers, for the last few years. Um, Most recently, I've worked with a publisher in Oakland, California, called National Monument Press. And we met at an artist residency and just started talking about ideas, what he does, what he has ideas about, what I do, what I have ideas about. And at the end of the residency, we agreed that we wanted to work together. We just made a book as part of a series that he is working on with a risograph printer, collaborating with 12 photographers over the course of 12 months to really create a sample book of the range of capabilities that a risograph has when working in a single color with photography.
Wow, cool.
So it's been really fun. Um, Before that, I worked with a publisher in Oregon who I have known. The publisher is someone who I went to graduate school with, and he was really excited about the pictures from Goodbye High Street and this kind of three-generation view,
Mm,
and asked if I had enough work to think about that as a book. And I had a counter proposal, which was making a collaborative project with a photographer who I'd been having a dialogue with online for several years, pictures back and forth. Um, but it's been exciting because it feels like in some ways the first book I made with a publisher was in 2015 of Homesick. And in some ways it feels like the books beget the books.
mm,
I feel really committed to the experience of looking at books, of collecting books, of engaging with the book as the medium. And so when I make pictures, I try to imagine
mm,
how I might organize it in the book form.
mm,
Um, and I've been trying to figure that out with Our Body as a Clock for a long time.
mm, mm. Do you have any tips or suggestions or advice for artists, I guess maybe specifically photographers out there who would like to publish a book, but they don't really know where to begin?
Mhm. Um, yeah, I would say you have to be really obsessed, and it's important as part of that obsession and hunger to go to book fairs, go to bookstores, look at the catalogs of the publishers, who you admire, see what kind of work they publish. Pay attention to the publishers who accept blind submissions. Think about what events, public programs, and book release events you might be able to attend to meet photographers or artists who are publishing, meet their publishers. So much of publishing is about not just relationships, but friendships. And I feel really lucky to have made some really great friends in this community of publishing. And it isn't an exclusive thing, but it's also not something where you can just be a tourist.
Do you also exhibit your photographs in the gallery setting?
I haven't done that so much, and I'm really hoping to do that in 2025, to have my first solo exhibition of Our Body as a Clock. And I've been working really hard to figure out where that will happen. And hopefully by the fall of this year, I can let you know where that will be next year.
Do you have any other projects in the works?
I'm interested in photographing people. And my next pivot, I'm interested in photographing people who connect with this idea of an absence of visibility of chronically ill and disabled people. So if anyone is interested in being photographed, please reach out.
Yeah. And what are your, I don't want to use the word qualifications, but so if people are experiencing what, do you want us to get you in touch with them?
If people identify as being chronically ill or disabled in any capacity, and I think the only real qualification is that I live in the Hudson Valley, so I need to be able to get to you.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, we'll share the word. And listeners, I highly encourage you to check out Sara's website, sarajwinston.com, and I'll include links on social media and all the places, so you'll be able to find her, follow her, maybe purchase a book. Yeah, they look wonderful. And they're smaller editions, right? They're like 200, edition of 50 on one of them. So it's a really special, kind of unique art object. So yeah, Sara, thank you so much for sharing this and your work and your journey with us.
Thank you so much for having me and for your thoughtful questions.
All right, listeners, that's all for this week. Please be sure to tune in next week as I will be speaking with Emily DiCarlo, a Toronto-based artist whose work explores the subjective nature of time and its relationship to labor and the demands of late capitalism. Hope to see you all then. Have a safe week. Bye-bye.